Welcome inside the War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we're back today for episode 46 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. On today's show, we're going to do a rookie mock draft with landing spots. So I've found a mock draft that was recently put out by the Athletics' Dane Brugler. He is very good at this. He's very plugged into NFL circles, and he released his second edition of a 2025 NFL mock draft, 2 rounds, so first and second round here, and plenty of fantasy relevant rookies included in here. So we're going to use this mock draft as if it were real, as if these were the actual landing spots for these players, and run through at least the first round of a Dynasty Superflex rookie mock draft, see how these players would slot in, and then we'll do a quick discussion on some of these second-round players as well. There are 19 players in total that would be fantasy football relevant that are selected in this 2-round mock draft from Dane Brugler. So we'll touch on all of those players, but we'll primarily focus on that top 12 here in the first round of your drafts. So with that being said, before we jump into the episode, just a reminder, follow us on Twitter at Dynasty War Room. Find us on Facebook. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel at the same handle at Dynasty War Room, and go follow this show on whatever platform you're currently listening to. We're on every podcast platform out there, so go give us a follow, leave us a 5-star review, and with all that being said, time to just move on into the show, and we'll kick things off with the 101, which, of course, everyone knows at this point that right now it's going to be Ashton Jeanty, running back at Boise State. And he, in this draft, was a first-round pick by the Denver Broncos, 20th overall. So before we actually get into the rest of these picks, I suppose that the best way to handle this would be to touch on where these players were all taken in this NFL mock draft, and then run through the picks. So Ashton Jeanty, though, obviously is going to be the first overall pick in 98% of drafts. There will be the occasional manager that prefers Tet McMillan, but by and large, it's going to be Ashton Jeanty that goes 101 in your rookie draft. And he goes 20th overall in this mock draft. So Dane Brugler released this draft on Wednesday, January 15th. So the latter spots in the first round, we're not decided yet. It'll depend on how the playoffs shake out. So a couple of these spots won't line up exactly in terms of, whether who's picking at 28 and 31, etc. But by and large, most of the NFL draft order is set. So in this draft, he had Cam Ward going first overall to the Tennessee Titans, quarterback out of Miami. Travis Hunter went 3rd overall to the New York Giants. Tet McMillan, wide receiver out of Arizona, went 4th overall to the New England Patriots. Shedeur Sanders, quarterback out of Colorado, went 6th overall to the Raiders. Luther Burden, Missouri wide receiver, went 12th overall to the Dallas Cowboys. Tyler Warren, the tight end from Penn State, went 14th overall to the Indianapolis Colts. Ashton Jeanty, who we just mentioned, went 20th to the Denver Broncos. Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver from Ohio State, went 21st to the Pittsburgh Steelers. 22nd overall is tight end Colston Loveland from Michigan. He went to the Chargers. 24th overall, and the final first-round player in terms of the actual mock draft, Caleb Johnson, running back from Iowa, went to the Minnesota Vikings. And then in the second round of Dane Brugler's mock draft, we have Jalen Milroe, quarterback at Alabama. He went with the second pick in the second round to the New York Giants. With the 5th pick in the second round, Amarian Hampton, running back from North Carolina, went to the Raiders. With the 8th pick in the second round, Matthew Golden, Texas wide receiver, went to the New Orleans Saints. With the 12th pick in the second round, running back Travion Henderson from Ohio State to the Dallas Cowboys. The 16th pick in the second round, tight end Harold Fannin from Bowling Green went to the Miami Dolphins. Another tight end off the board at the 19th pick in the second round, Mason Taylor to the Denver Broncos out of LSU. And Trey Harris, Ole Miss wide receiver, going 26th to the Texans. Stanford wide receiver Alec Eomanor went 28th to the Commanders. And with the 31st pick in the second round, wide receiver Jaden Higgins from Iowa State off the board to the Kansas City Chiefs. So there you have it. That is the first and second round of this mock draft, NFL Mock Draft 2.0 from Dane Brugler of The Athletic. And that is what we're using for our fantasy mock draft here with our Dynasty Superflex rankings here. So, as we mentioned, Ashton Jeanty went first overall for us in this draft. I think he's the slam dunk first overall pick. Landing with the Denver Broncos would be a very good situation. We've seen Sean Payton utilize Alvin Kamara in a very good way for fantasy football over the years. And he's a coach that wants to run the ball. He wants to establish the run. Javonte Williams hasn't been able to get it done. They have a handful of other backs that are more complementary pieces, like Jaleel McLaughlin and Audric Estime, who they drafted in the later rounds last year. But if Ashton Jeanty were to go first round of Denver, that would become his backfield. And we saw a lot of good progress from Bo Nix as a rookie to where Denver would have a pretty good offense moving forward. And I think that'd be a landing spot that dynasty managers would feel good about for Ashton Jeanty. Now, with the second pick in our rookie mock draft, we're going to go with Tet McMillan, the wide receiver from Arizona. He went fourth overall to the New England Patriots in this draft. And I think we all see the obvious upside to this selection, both for the player and the team, because he's getting paired up with Drake May. Patriots desperately need a wide receiver one. None of their receiver picks from last year's draft really panned out, and this is a really good opportunity to link up a talented first-round quarterback with a big-time playmaker at wide receiver. So I think that's a very solid 102 pick. I think he's pretty much going to be locked in there. Assuming he goes in the top 10, I have a hard time seeing, someone else really jumping McMillan for that number 2 spot in rookie drafts, but a lot can change over the course of the next couple months. Every single year there are movement in terms of players that we think will go higher and then they fall down the board, and guys that are taken in more of a surprise spot, or that shoot up the board with things like the combine and trades leading up to the draft, things like that. So landing spot, of course, is important. The Patriots is no longer going to be a bad spot for receivers, for a long time here since Tom Brady retired. It was a pretty rough landing spot with, a quarterback like Mac Jones and just the struggles that they have had. But no longer. I think Drake May definitely is a promising young prospect. So Tet McMillan at the 102. Now, in this draft, Dane Brugler had Caleb Johnson going in the first round. So 2 first-round running backs. This with Johnson going 24th to the Minnesota Vikings. So that's who I'm going to take third overall in our rookie mock draft here, because running backs that go in the first round are just almost always slam dunk picks. I mean, if you think back over the years, the only real player that I can think of off the top of my head in the last, 5, 6, 7 years, etc., that was a running back that just didn't really pan out is probably Rashad Penny when the Seattle took him in the 20s. And that obviously didn't work out. But other than that, you run through all the guys that were taken in the first round. I mean, it's just recently with Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, and then going back, there's, the bigger, more obvious names that are typically at the top of rookie drafts every single year, like the Saquon Barkleys, the Zeke Elliott's, players like that, Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor was a second-round pick, but even the early second-round picks tend to do very well. So a lot of really, really good first-round running backs. There just aren't a lot of busts from that standpoint, and if you're able to land a first-round running back at the 103 in a draft class full of good running backs, I'd feel very good about that. And so that's why I have Caleb Johnson, who's more of a, grinded out, early down back. He's not necessarily going to be super flashy in the receiving game, but a very strong runner, has a nose for the end zone. So I think he'd fit right in on a very good Minnesota Vikings offense. At the 104, I'm going to go with Cam Ward, the number 1 overall pick to the Titans. I think it's difficult to have quarterbacks, especially quarterbacks with rushing upside, fall past the 4th or 5th pick in a superflex draft, particularly one this year where there's not a lot of other high-end quarterbacks or wide receivers. It's something where if your team really struggled this year and you ended up with a top 4, top 5 pick, chances are you need to add a quarterback to your roster. So Ward, I think, makes a lot of sense. Tennessee, they're in an interesting position here. They have Calvin Ridley. They have a couple veteran players on offense, really, between with Tony Pollard, and then their big free agent signing in Ridley. So they need a quarterback. Will Levis did not get it done. He's a turnover machine. Mason Rudolph, nothing more than a solid backup quarterback, in my opinion. And Cam Ward with the 1st overall pick makes a lot of sense. He had a really great season at Miami. He is somebody that can run the ball. He chooses not to a lot of the time, but he's a very mobile quarterback. He can avoid sacks. He can run when necessary. I don't think this is someone that's going to run for 1,000 yards in the NFL or anything like that, but he can get you 300 yards, 400 yards on the ground, I think, which provides you with a very solid floor with fantasy football. If you know that you're getting 30, 40 yards a game on the ground from your running back or from your quarterback, that's, 3 to 4 fantasy points. And chances are, there's going to be a good increase in goal line opportunities for a QB, especially with somebody of Cam Ward's size. He's a big guy and lots of potential here. So I don't know that I love the prospect necessarily. He would probably be lower than a few of the quarterbacks that came out last year. But given the scenario and the need for QB at the top of this draft among a number of different teams, I fully expect him to be a top 2 or 3 pick, likely number 1 overall to the Titans. And I think he makes a lot of sense here with the 4th pick in Dynasty drafts. Next up, we're going to go back to running back here at the 105. And I'm going to go with a guy that went in the 2nd round, Travion Henderson, Ohio State running back. He went to the Dallas Cowboys with the 12th pick in the 2nd round in this draft. So Dallas has long been talked about as, a guy, or Dallas is a great landing spot for running backs. It's a good offense with Dak Prescott. You got CeeDee Lamb. And now that with the coaching change, it'll be a little bit interesting to see how they move forward. It sounds like at this moment in time, Kellen Moore, Eagles offensive coordinator, is someone that has a pretty good shot at getting that job. I know there's been some Deion Sanders rumblings, but I think that this is probably going to be the Kellen Moore spot. And Travion Henderson is somebody that can catch the ball as a running back. He's got elite speed. He does have some injury concerns over the years. He just couldn't stay on the field during college. However, he was a top prospect, 5-star guy. A lot of people have been high on him for a long time. And he split carries with Quinshon Judkins this year. And I think he's got a bright future in the NFL. So with the 5th overall pick, that's who I'm going to take here in this draft. Coming up at number 6, I'm going to go with Amarian Hampton, another running back, this one out of North Carolina. And Hampton actually goes a few picks ahead of Travion Henderson in this mock draft. He went 5th in the 2nd round to the Las Vegas Raiders, who will have a new coach. They will likely have a new quarterback. In this draft, he's getting paired up with Shedeur Sanders, who the Raiders took at 6th overall in the draft. Now, instead of Shedeur Sanders, I have Amarian Hampton ahead of him. And that's because I think when we talk about an early 2nd-round running back, a team that desperately needs a guy, it's going to be a new coaching staff. There's a lot of talk about Ben Johnson taking that Raiders job, and we've all seen what the Lions running game has turned into. This is a guy that can both catch the ball, run. He's been a big part of the North Carolina offense the last 2 seasons. I wouldn't say he's an elite pass catcher or anything like that. I think he's just somebody that can be a good safety valve, but he's a strong runner, and he's a guy that I think can be a solid 3-down running back in the NFL. So if he gets the volume, I think getting that type of player with the 6th pick is a great spot to be in. Next up at 107, I am going to go with Shedeur Sanders, who in this world of Dane Brugler's 2nd mock draft, the Raiders end up with Shedeur Sanders with the 6th overall pick, pair him with Amarian Hampton in the second round. And Sanders is somebody that I think in a lot of ways is similar to Cam Ward as a player in terms of their mobility. They can create plays, they can extend plays. They kind of have a little bit of that Caleb Williams, flashiness to their game. But Sanders is a little bit smaller of a guy than Cam Ward. I don't know that he's got as big of an arm, but still a very productive college quarterback. I worry a little bit about, the circus show with the off the field, with his dad and his brothers and just everything else. And that's probably something that we won't need to worry about in the NFL, especially assuming if Deion Sanders' dad stays at Colorado. But I just don't know if I love Sanders as a prospect. I think he's a talented college quarterback, but I want to see, some athleticism at the combine, which he should do well with. But I just want to see that. I want to see how, the draft process plays out for him and see what teams really think. Because this is something where how NFL teams view Shedeur Sanders is essentially going to determine how we feel about him for fantasy. Because if teams love him, they take him in the top 5, top 6 in this scenario, then okay, I think you're locked in with having him as a top probably 8 pick in rookie drafts. Again, it's one of those things where if you have a top 10 quarterback in Superflex that is guaranteed to be the starter in year 1, hard to pass on that. Unless it's a situation like last year where there's, a bunch of different quarterbacks that go in the top 12. But here, weaker quarterback class, if you have a need, I could certainly see Sanders go even higher than this. But for now, I'm going to put him at the 107. At the 108, I'm going to take Luther Burden, the wide receiver who at one point was thought about as potential wide receiver 1 in this class. Had a bit of a down year this past season, but still put up some solid production at Missouri. And he's more of a slot guy. He's a smaller receiver at 5'11", more of a route runner, somebody like that. He's not necessarily going to be like a big play, high point the ball, red zone threat. He's more of a move the sticks kind of guy. So obviously we've seen that have a very, that has a very important place on NFL teams. And it's great for fantasy, especially in full PPR leagues, which is how most dynasty leagues are now. So if you're getting that full PPR scoring, I think Luther Burden is absolutely a good target. And in this draft, he was a first-round pick, the second receiver off the board, depending on how you view Travis Hunter. But other than if we view Hunter as more of a corner, and we're going to get to Travis Hunter in a minute and discuss that, but as of right now, I'm viewing him as more of a corner that also plays some wide receiver instead of a wide receiver that also plays some corner. And so in this draft, we had Ted McMillan go 4th overall to the Patriots, and then Luther Burden went 12th overall to the Dallas Cowboys. So from a fantasy perspective, any receiver that the Dallas Cowboys take in the early rounds, they're never going to be the wide receiver 1 on the team. It's just not going to happen. CeeDee Lamb is too good. He's got the extension. He's going to be there long term. He's, one of the top 3-4 receivers in the entire NFL. We've seen him be an absolute league winner in fantasy football. So no, Luther Burden is not going to take over CeeDee Lamb's role. However, outside of CeeDee Lamb, the Dallas offense has been, a bit of a tough watch without having an elite running back. Brandon Cooks has kind of lost a step over the years. So I think he would slot right in as a solid number 2 receiver. You've got Dak Prescott, who I think will bounce back after the injury. And if it's somebody like Kellen Moore coming in, he's, shown that he's a proven offensive mind. And I like the fit. They need somebody else that they can get the ball to. We've seen plenty of wide receiver 2s on teams be fantasy relevant. Some become extremely relevant for fantasy. And we're talking guys like T. Higgins, Devonta Smith, players that are seen as the number 2 on their team, but still very, very good for fantasy football. Even this past year, you could look at guys, there's guys like Jordan Addison, Jameson Williams for the Lions. I mean, you could go down the list. There's a whole bunch of wide receiver 2s that have been very good. The Texans had, Stephon Diggs to go with Nico Collins. So I think this is a good spot. I think we've seen in the NFL that you need 2 good wide receivers really to win. And so this is a good fit for Luther Burden here at the 108. And if he goes to another team, I think I would maybe even have him above of Shedeur Sanders. You can't argue with top 12 draft capital. That's a really good spot to be. And if you're a team that needs a receiver in that, middle of the first round, I think Luther Burden is probably the guy that you're most interested in terms of seeing how the draft process goes. You're hoping that he has a good combine. You're hoping that the interviews go well. You obviously want him to go as high as possible in the draft to really strengthen the middle of this first round. And there's one other wide receiver I think that could go in this range, depending on landing spot, who we're going to get to in just a minute. But Luther Burden right now is my wide receiver 2. All right, so moving on up to the 109 in this rookie draft. And I'm going to go with Colston Loveland, the first tight end off the board in our draft. Tight end out of Michigan. In this situation, he goes 22nd overall, which is not the highest among tight ends. Tyler Warren actually goes higher at 14 to the Colts. But this is something about, to me, this is a fit and landing spot decision. And the reason that I take Colston Loveland over Tyler Warren, who, as a spoiler, is going to go next at the 110. So we'll talk about these guys together here. They're both tight ends. So Colston Loveland at 109, he goes to the Chargers, and then Tyler Warren at 110 to the Colts. So the reason that I've loved Loveland ahead of Warren in this draft comes down to the Jim Harbaugh connection. Jim Harbaugh, coach of the Chargers, he's always had an offense that loves throwing to the tight end. We saw guys be productive this year like Will Dissly. Stone Smart had a couple of nice games. So this is something where Harbaugh wants to have his quarterback, connect with a tight end. And he obviously has that college connection with Loveland being from Michigan, recruited him and played for Jim Harbaugh. And you are set at the quarterback position. So Justin Herbert is somebody that has targeted the tight end position in the past. We've seen over the last couple of years that position be successful in fantasy despite having a relative lack of talent at the position. So to me, this is something where Ladd McConkey is really the only other big receiving threat in this offense. And if you compare somebody like Colston Loveland with a Justin Herbert and a Harbaugh offense, a Jim Harbaugh offense, I think that's a really good spot to be in as a tight end. Tyler Warren, however, he might be a little bit more dynamic, and he goes to the Colts 14th, which obviously is better than going 22nd. However, this is a team without the stability of the Chargers. We don't know the quarterback situation with Anthony Richardson, how long that's going to last. Is this going to be something where he starts the season, but as soon as he starts to struggle, they make a change, then they're in the quarterback market again a year from now? Or does he play well? Does Richardson take over the job and just keep it and lock in and become a good fantasy quarterback moving forward, which could certainly happen. He has the rushing ability. We've seen the big games in the past. But even if he does, I don't know that I trust the arm of Anthony Richardson enough to take Warren over Colston Loveland in a tight end friendly offense with the Chargers. So that's the reasoning behind those picks there at 9 and 10. But either way, if you're picking in the back of the first round, I think that both of these guys would be great picks. They're both projected to go in the first round. And if you're, a team that has one of those later picks or even early second, depending on how things go, if you are an early second round drafter and you need a tight end, you should be hoping that the quarterbacks really ball out, at the combine and through the process, and that guys like Jalen Milroe goes higher, that Quinn Ewers sneaks up in the draft, and that some of these other receivers sneak into the first round as well, because those guys will probably jump these tight ends. So keep that in mind. And obviously, come draft time, if you need to move up a spot or two, that's something you can do to secure one of these guys. But Loveland, Warren, a great tight end duo. And there's still one more tight end that I think is just as talented, and he's going to go in a few picks here. But for now, let's move on to the 111, which is going to be wide receiver Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State. He goes 21st overall to the Pittsburgh Steelers in this draft. And Pittsburgh really needs a good, solid number 2 receiver. They have George Pickens, who is their wide receiver 1, but he's got a bit of an off-the-field problem, bad attitude, just somebody that's hard to count on. And Egbuka is somebody that I think is pretty much the opposite. He's more consistent. He's reliable. He's, been there every year at Ohio State and been a solid contributor, even though they've had other star wide receivers. He has no issues being the number 2. And he's just, put his head down and, been a steady guy. He came back to school at Ohio State and, to try to win a national title and all those things. And he solidified his draft position. I think he probably would have been a late first-round pick last year had he come out. I think he's going to be somewhere in that same range this year, so he didn't really hurt himself. That didn't necessarily help himself, but this wide receiver class is weaker, so I think that, in a sense, does help him a bit. But 21st off the board to the Steelers, who have been relatively good at identifying wide receiver talent over the years. It's just more about finding somebody that's more consistent for them. And who knows? He could be this team's wide receiver 1 if we continue to see the struggles and the ups and downs of George Pickens. So I think this was a pick that would make a lot of sense. Now, there would be some quarterback questions here. We don't know if it'll be Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, a rookie, a free agent signing, whatever the case may be. My expectation right now is that it will stay Russell Wilson, but you never know. We'll see how things play out. All right. The last pick here in the first round is a really, really difficult spot. This is where I think things truly get difficult. I had the most difficult time. I went back and forth with the selection. In fact, I still am kind of going back and forth right now. I could change my pick here on the show, but this to me comes down to Travis Hunter and Jalen Milroe, who, Jalen Milroe is somebody that we've seen in college be a dynamic runner. He's been in big moments. Now, he hasn't always played the best in those big moments. Michigan certainly got the better of him 2 years in a row. However, it's that rushing floor, right? When you talk about fantasy football, somebody that can give you a really high floor at the quarterback position, you love to see that. And in this draft, he goes with the second pick in the second round to the New York Giants, who need a quarterback. However, in this scenario, in the first round, the New York Giants also selected Travis Hunter, the wide receiver and cornerback out of Colorado. And so I'm going to pick Travis Hunter in this spot, and it's because I think he is simply a more talented player than Jalen Milroe. It's from a value standpoint, I think you can definitely make the case that having the running quarterback that goes in the early second to a team that clearly needs a starter makes more sense. But I could see his value dropping off a lot faster if he doesn't look well or doesn't play well. This isn't something where when you go in the top 10, you're basically given 2 years or you're given a little bit more of a runway to have mistakes and mature over time. Look at Bryce Young as a perfect example. He went first overall, looked terrible. Came back this year, looked terrible again. But he was still given the opportunity to start the season as a starting quarterback. Played terrible, got benched briefly, and then came back and now actually looks fairly good. But then you contrast that with somebody like Will Levis, who, there's no reason for the Titans to just hold on to hope there. He was a second-round pick. You're not losing out on a whole lot by giving up on him after, what was... he had a somewhat decent rookie season, only a handful of games, and then this year just injuries and turnovers, and clearly not the guy, right? Everyone kind of just agrees. They see it. He's not going to be the franchise quarterback for the Titans. So you get a bit more of a runway. Look at Anthony Richardson, another case. He has not played well enough to keep that starting job, but because he was a top 10 pick, he's going to be the starting quarterback again next year. He's going to get another opportunity to keep that job. And, Daniel Jones, another type of guy like this. You can go down the list. There's first-round guys, unless your name is Trey Lance, you get an opportunity to keep this job long-term. Jalen Milroe in this draft went in the early part of the second round. He doesn't have that job security the same way. Travis Hunter, however, is a very good wide receiver. If he were guaranteed to be playing wide receiver, he would be going much higher in this draft. So this is where I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about Travis Hunter throughout the next 4 months because everyone knows he's a talented player. He won the Heisman Trophy. But the question is he going to play offense or defense? He plays both. He's above average at both positions. I think that if you go purely off of talent, he would probably be right there with Tet McMillan in terms of who the best receiver in this draft is. I'd probably have him number 2 behind McMillan. And if we knew right now that he was going to exclusively play wide receiver, or even if he were to play corner, that he was, going to play 90% of snaps on offense as well, he would be much, much higher on this list. So I don't want this to be something like, oh, you hate Travis Hunter. No, I think he's a very talented player. My issue for fantasy football is that I don't know that he's going to be on the field enough to be worth an early or mid first round pick in a rookie draft. I think that's going to be the problem that everybody runs into. You're going to have your more casual players that get enamored with the name and take him sooner because, oh, it's Travis Hunter. He won the Heisman. He's so good, whatever. But when it comes to actual production and how he really helps your fantasy team, is that going to be your best use of resources if you don't know that he's going to be on the field all the time? I think generally speaking, he's regarded as a slightly better corner than he is a wide receiver. So it wouldn't shock me if teams, use him as a corner first and a wide receiver second, and they have a package for him where he's playing, 40% of snaps on offense, 50% of snaps, something where, he's going to be on the field. He'll get some targets. He'll have a few catches per game, but is it going to be something where, he's going to be getting 10 targets or be a red zone threat? Like, I just don't know. It's too early in the process to know. And so that's what makes this decision very difficult. But I am going to go with Hunter at 12, only because, again, I think it's a more secure position. He went third overall compared to being in the second round. The talent, the commitment certainly would be there. Now, he wouldn't be a wide receiver 1 in this particular mock draft scenario because he goes to the Giants, where it's clearly going to be Malik Neighbors. So again, that also factors in making this a bit more difficult. But given this is all pretend, this is a mock draft based on another mock draft, that's, I'm just running through both names so people can kind of see my thought process on this. But Travis Hunter is going to be the 112. And then if we were to go into a full second round based on these picks, Jalen Milroe would be the 201 and be my first pick in the second round because, again, there is a lot of upside there. If you're picking first in the second round, you probably took Ashton Genty at the 101, and having a quarterback that can run the ball to pair with your stud running back is a good combo. So in the second round here, we won't dissect this quite the same way. It'll be a bit more brief here. I'm not going to run through everything, but of the players that were taken, I would probably take them in this order. So we said Jalen Milroe at the 201. He went with the second pick in the second round in this draft to the Giants. Next up would probably be Harold Fannin, the tight end. He went to Miami in this draft in the mid second round, 16th pick in the second round. He was another guy that I think fits right into that Loveland Warren tier right now. Very athletic, had a crazy stat line in college. So he's somebody that I think teams will fall in love with. I could easily see him go in the first round of the NFL draft. Trey Harris would probably be next on the list. He went in the back of the second to the Houston Texans in this mock draft, and I think that's a really good spot to be a solid number 2. Now, obviously, it'll depend on what happens with Stephon Diggs. So Trey Harris could start his career as a number 3, should this be how the draft plays out. But I like the potential and the fit there with a pocket passer in C.J. Stroud. At the 204, I would go with Matthew Golden, the Texas wide receiver. He goes in the early second to the New Orleans Saints. Again, this is a situation where he's probably the number 2 or the number 3 even behind Rashid Shaheed is probably still the number 2 on this team, and then Chris Olave is, of course, the number 1. But Olave has been injured, so has Shaheed. This team needs offensive weapons. They really need a quarterback upgrade, so that is an unfortunate aspect of this as well. But he is somebody that I think will be a draft riser. Ayo Manor, who I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his name right, went to Stanford. He goes to the Commanders at the back of the second in this draft. I think he would be a very solid mid-second round pick based on this landing spot. He would slot in right behind Terry McLaurin. We've seen Jaden Daniels already ascend to being one of those truly elite fantasy options. And then the last 2 picks here would be Jaden Higgins, wide receiver, going to the Chiefs in the second round, and then Mason Taylor, tight end, to the Broncos in the mid-second round. So based purely on the players selected in this 2-round mock draft, that is how I would order those players in the second round. Now, in an actual rookie mock draft, you are certainly going to have running backs that are taken in the 3rd round jump a number of these players. You'll see guys like Quinshon Judkins go higher. You'll see, who knows about some of the other names, right? There's Dylan Sampson, Ollie Gordon. I mean, it's Nick Singleton returned to school. So if you listen to the rookie episode last week where we really talked through a whole bunch of names, Nick Singleton out of Penn State was a running back we liked. He was projected to leave, but then he decided to go back to school. So that hurts the running back class a little bit, but there will still certainly be running backs that would fall into this early second round range, depending on how the 3rd round shakes out. After that, though, you're probably not taking 4th, 5th round running backs or receivers over guys that went in the 2nd round, pretty much regardless of position. So these are names to know. That's why we're kind of jumping on this early, because it's good to familiarize with these players, get a feel for where draft experts say that they'll go, and you can start doing a little bit of evaluation in terms of how much your own rookie draft picks are worth as we jump into the offseason. So there you have it. I'll run through our mock draft here, 1 through 12, just to give people a refresher here before we sign off. At 101, we went with Ashton Genty. The 102, Tet McMillan. 103, Caleb Johnson. 104, Cam Ward. 105, Travion Henderson. 106, Amarian Hampton. 107, Shadur Sanders. 108, Luther Burden. 109, Colston Loveland. 110, Tyler Warren. 111, Emeka Egbuka. And 112, Travis Hunter. So there you have it. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back again next week with another episode. With that, I'm Andrew Valancourt. You've been listening to the Dynasty War Room podcast. Thank you for tuning in.